this.
But anyway, I'm sure he'll be back. You better grab a call. Welcome, everybody, to the May 2024 WITI Digital Health Biotech Community. We're excited to have Ian Slade and Dan Kraus here to share with us all the stuff about, using data in the digital transformation age, and seems to be changing weekly, but I'm going to kick it over.
Yeah, thanks, David. Ian, do you want to say a few words, or should I just jump in and kick this off?
Yeah, for any of you who have who just joined us for the first time, I'd like to say welcome. This is our digital health series, monthly series that we do. I typically am your host, and every now and then we have amazing speakers like Dan Klaus over here that will be talking to us about data in the transformation age. And we will have breakout sessions here today as well. So don't be a stranger. Please stick around. And as you guys have questions, feel free to raise your digital hand or just go ahead and chime in here. We're pretty informal. And with that, Dan, thank you so much. We can start with just a little bit of a background of your professional journey, and we'll jump into your presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And thanks everyone for joining this. I'm really impressed with the backgrounds that were shared, and this is kind of I don't know, it's a little bit more. I tried to arrange this talk to be a little more interesting, a little more entertaining, and kind of incorporate some of my own experience and views and things that Ian and I both kind of share as well. So my background, I put a slide together just to kind of cover it. So I've got 25 years of really working in the data, the world of data has been kind of my career. I tend to specialize in data visualization, but also plenty of experience doing data warehousing, engineering. I've worked plenty with machine learning and AI, and optimization problems is a current area of focus for me. I started in life sciences, a biotech startup that grew to a multi-billion-dollar company. I built all of the data warehousing and infrastructure for those guys. Then switched over to financial services, and for 6 years was an executive vice president and a leader in different areas of analytical roles for those firms. And for the last 9 years, I've been running my own consulting company, which is Clear Data. And we have mostly focused on healthcare clients. The typical example of the work we do would be engaging with a client, understand how to present their data better, how to get more value and use out of their data. We usually roll out Tableau as a tool to help them get there, to see it better and understand it better. And it usually involves quite a bit of work on the data itself as a way to just, leverage the tools and the techniques that we want to use. So, so the framework for the talk today, I'm trying to juggle a bunch of things at once. So you can kind of think of this as a maturity curve, I guess, of how your data gets used. As you go higher and higher up in these different arcs, the value of what we're doing, I think, gets higher and stronger. And I'm also going to try to throw in some historical references to give you context, and try to look at things a little bit more, from a human perspective, if that makes sense. So it's a very different way of thinking than what I usually do. every day. So hopefully this will make sense to you guys. But feel free to chime in with questions or anything that doesn't make sense. Happy to do that. So the first arc I want to cover, just we're talking about, if we go back in time before databases and technology and everything was a thing. So a good example is the history of medical records and the modern electronic medical record systems that we have today that run all of our hospitals. So those didn't always exist back in, pre 1960. Everything was done on paper, and the trouble there, obviously, is you'd have to do a lot of manual labor to just understand something. If you wanted to trend out, the average blood pressure of a patient in a hospital, like you had to pull a lot of paper, do a lot of work, keep all that in your head, so to speak, and manually write it all down. And in the mid 60s, the first electronic medical system came online, and it just grew from there. And today we have, obviously very modern systems that run hospitals. So one of the themes it's going to be recurring here is that, so obviously that feels like progress, and it certainly is. We certainly would not ever want to go back to the days of doing everything out on paper, but I really love this idea that technology is a double-edged sword, and the moment you invent electricity, you invent electrocution and disasters. You invent the plane and a plane crash at the same time. There's always this sort of downside to the progress that you made, and in a way, this sort of arc is sort of like a punctuation of like the dark side of the first step leads to the second step, and so on. And that's not totally consistent. This is a little bit loose, but that's one of the ideas I was trying to get across here, is that, we go from one leap to another, and this theme kind of trickles in throughout the talk. So another view of this same timeline. So if you think about it, within the first few weeks of whatever system this was that was first created, humans could no longer like look into that database and read through it the same way they were reading through the charts. And so the dark side, I guess, of like putting together data systems that would electronically track things is that humans had to adapt. They had to, sort of develop new ways of getting their questions answered that no longer made sense in a pencil and paper kind of world. So the way that we do this, and this is true today, probably as it was true back then, is you have to, if you want to ask questions and get insights from your data, you have to do work on the data. And this is a very general kind of diagram or idea here, but there's really 3 steps to it. First, you have to make a copy of whatever data you have. You can never really, it's not a good idea anyway, to try to run an analytical question or program right on top of a production system like an EMR. You want to pull off a copy and then do all your work on that separate side copy. So first we extract the data, that's our copy. We transform the data. So this is where the artistry happens from my perspective. Like you have to really design elegant ways of getting at the questions you want to answer, anticipate all kinds of other dimensionality to those questions, and finally load that into a system that helps you with your analysis. So this is kind of one of those, in my own personal experience in my career, like these 3 steps is like almost true of anything that you do in data, even AI and all this stuff. Like there's some form of this same process at play. anytime you want to sort of make use of data. So, so this is that sort of, the knock-on effect of us as humans becoming loaded with data and having these systems which just recorded everything. That's great, but then how do you get in there and understand it and look at it? You need to do this type of thing. Another step involved here is arranging that data into a design that allows you to do analysis. So it's too much to sort of explain in a talk like this, but what you're trying to do is basically standardize all the different dimensions of the data. So if you want to look at things by month, by sales category, by product line, by whatever, like all of those buys should be sort of dimensions and separate tables that you can use for analysis. And there's other ways of optimizing the data that it's just there's too much to talk about here, but this is kind of, the approach that you have to take to really do anything meaningful with your data. So it's a good sort of baseline topic. So the next sort of like leap that I want to make is to go from a world where things are kind of hidden from sight and things that are now visible, right? So I think a good analogy is the history of the X-ray. So this was a technology that was discovered actually a long time ago. And in the 1800s, someone figured out that they could see inside their hand basically by passing it over these sort of diodes, or I don't know the full history of it, but there was a lot of, it took a while for it to become mainline or mainstream practice in medical settings, because there was some danger to it, obviously. But so by the 1930s, we're able to look inside the human body without cutting it open and without doing a procedure, invasive procedure, and this really changed things in a big way. And so,
Dan, I have a question.
sure.
So with the nature of data nowadays and us being able to quote unquote see inside, right, with all of the analytics that we have, do you see the parallel or maybe the metaphor for this into where we are right now in terms of looking beyond just what is obvious and seeing, patterns, seeing causalities, correlations that we have after you go beyond the initial, view of the data that we have. Is that something that you're seeing?
Yeah, for sure, Ian. I think, in a lot of ways, it's a good analogy because the truth is, like, just, if all you're doing is stuffing a bunch of data into a database, there's no obvious way to just like, look in there and see anything that's happening. What are the trends? What are the correlations? What are the important patterns that are important for us to recognize so that we can make better decisions? So the analogy works to a point. I think where the analogy falls apart is that, obviously, like data is really just sort of it's not even real. It's just a bunch of, it's like there's actual bones inside your body. You can see that with an X-ray. There's not the equivalent thing in a database. It's just, it is real, I guess. It's an abstraction of reality is maybe a better way to say it. So you have to, I guess, to stretch the analogy further, you'd have to have like different types of X-ray machines to see the types of things that you want to visualize. So this little picture here is like an example of a dashboard that you might see in a hospital. So, you know, how many patients came through our hospital on average over the last 3 months? Well, 615. Okay, that's great. Like that took a little bit of work to figure that out. And that's the beauty of these tools, is like you can just get answers very quickly. You can see, you know, we have a lower count, and our encounters are sort of trending down for some reason, as well as visits. You know, that might be something we need to think about further, or we have to investigate. So, you know, you have to come at the data with a specific, you know, question that you have in mind, I guess. Like this is great for just seeing what's happening, but if you want to predict what's going to happen next, for example, or you want to say, how does this experience of our patient list correlate with that from other hospitals? Well, that's a different kind of question, different tool, different type of analysis. So the way that, you know, we live in a world where, you know, there's all this beautiful stuff on Instagram, and we're kind of subconsciously being drawn more and more to things that are beautiful and enticing, and data is no different. I think this is really the other part of the story, is that we have to, I think it's really important for anyone considering a career in data that you have to be very creative now more than ever, because I think it's becoming more art, less science. The way you present information is it truly is an art form. I don't have any qualms saying that. You certainly have to know some technical things, but you know, the truth is you can't get people to engage with your information if it doesn't look good. It doesn't. They don't have the attention span any longer. They don't have the desire. So so this is a, you know, just kind of a you know, a way into the data is, you know, this idea of like an X-ray. All right. So
Sorry, Dan, what tool was that you used to show
this
the
is
display?
Tableau.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a Tableau dashboard. This is something that, this one's actually publicly available. You can find it, but there's others, of course. So, you know,
Have you seen any new things come with like generative AI? I know over the past year and a half, you know, there's kind of a lot of ways to automate things that may have taken, right, just for presentations. I know like Gamma, we talk about a lot. Have you found tools that you like that just might be, you know, for those that aren't as schooled on Tableau or some of these
sure.
others?
Yeah, there's certainly there's a lot of promise, I think, in that sense. Generative AI is just beginning to get down to the business of sucking in a bunch of data and describing it in words and also in pictures. And you know, Tableau itself is doing some of that right now. You know, everyone's kind of like jumping into that AI arms race, and you know, I think there's some really interesting stuff from Amazon in that regard. So Amazon Q would be a good technology to look at. It's an early adopter of that same idea. I think there's a lot of promise there. I'm going to cover a lot more AI stuff towards the end, but it's it does kind of come back to just, you know, we're talking specifically about healthcare and life sciences, and so there's a little bit higher bar for applications of AI in general, because you have to. First thing is you have to get it right. If you're sort of allowing AI to just give you the answer and you don't have full confidence that it's going to get it right, that's a problem, right? So I mean, the applications are there are applications there. It's just sort of like at this stage, things are just it's like here's the answer AI gave me, and now I need a human to read it and verify it and make sure it's correct.
Cool.
So
Thanks.
yeah, sure. Okay, so this is a weird sort of pivot, but I think it'll hopefully make sense in a minute. Just a question for you guys. Who here has more information for fingertips? This is President Clinton in the 1990s, leader of the free world, obviously well informed on many, many things, and a modern day teenage girl looking at doing an Instagram post or whatever she's doing there. So you probably guess the answer is the teenage girl has more information at her disposal than the president of the country in the 1990s. And so I think the theme that I'm going to talk about here is how do we adapt as human beings and also as organizations to this new problem of just having too much data for us to even comprehend and think about. So my view is honestly none of us were born with the ability to really make use of all this stuff. Like we have so much information now in our modern world. We have to adapt and we have to create processes and create new culture and behavior around information so that we can put it to use for our benefit and not be driven crazy by it. So the types of things I'm talking about, more on the organizational side, we need to secure the information, make sure that it's private. What's private belongs and stays private. We need to have governance, which is really a little bit about controlling access to information, but also about understanding the information, making sure that the people participating in a project all have the same understanding and definition of the data that they're looking at. There needs to be processes in place to quality control and test the data to make sure that it's actually lining up with expectations and standards. And there's really a cultural change that occurs, and this is true of every place I've worked, honestly. When you really begin to get serious about using and leveraging the data that you have as an organization, you have to change your culture. There's no other way to say it. Because if you don't take it seriously, it's like all the tech in the world will not solve your problems for you. You have to have people that are engaged. You have to have clear-cut understanding and expectations of how to use the data. And thirdly, you have to go and put it into action, which is really the part that's it really it's usually the hardest part of all. Like the way things are these days, the data is actually the easy part in a sense. So if we kind of like try to step back a bit, I've been jumping around these kind of random topics, but this view should hopefully clarify the overall, approach that will work for organizations to deal with data. So what we do, and this is kind of like based on stuff that Ian and I have talked about a lot, actually. So you have to, starting out, like survey the landscape, understand what are the real problems that the organization is wrestling with. You come up with a design of how to meet those challenges with data and information. You deliver, the visualizations and your sort of X-rays of the patient, if you will, and then you start putting that information and the insights that you glean from it, putting that into action. So setting up teams, sort of project teams, setting goals, clarifying like, here's the culture that we're going to sort of evolve into. And then you keep going back to that. You refine as you go. Maybe you start folding in AI and advanced modeling at that point to enhance the programs that you're creating from this approach. So I kind of like high level label these as like, the first three things are just called data readiness, getting your data in the organization ready to be used to do these transformative things. And then the transformative things, we just call it organizational change management. And so, this is really, again, it's about setting goals, getting people to engage with the information, and putting it into action and monitoring that execution, those things that you're actually changing. So, there's a pretty smart guy from, he goes back a few years, but Peter Drucker is one of the best business thinkers of, the late 70s and 80s. And, he famously said, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? That if you got enough of an imperative to invest in improving your business, you really need to invest in the tools that you need to measure what's happening. Because otherwise, gut feel is great if you're a solo entrepreneur, but if you're a billion-dollar business, you need to measure what you're doing, measure that very well and very accurately. So this is just a little more about, how you build up these types of programs. You kind of build your foundation with data readiness. You're using visuals and interactive material to get at the insights that you're gleaning from all this. And then it really, you can really describe it as having answers to three different questions: what, so what, and now what. So the what question is just getting the basics and history of what's happening in the organization. So what is like, why is this important? What can we figure out about those facts and that history? And then now what being like, what can we do about it? So just some of these examples, like, we have RNs handling 4.7 cases per shift. That's a what question. What's happening? This is what's happening. So what? Well, we know from context that 4.7 number is where turnover starts to really rise. And so and now what action step is finding additional staffing to relieve overworked nurses, giving them, more opportunity to split up or, share the burden of those cases. So that's what this looks like in action. So just to kind of recap a bit, like, so we've journeyed from dealing with just like, we have more data, what do we do about it? How do we use it to see things that are not really seeable? And then how have humans and organizations adapted to use all this information? So once you traverse these three, now you're into like the world of AI and machine learning, and you can kind of get better and better from there. But if you haven't traversed those few steps, it is a little tricky to jump ahead in that sense. So the rest of this is going to be talking about AI. The first level is kind of what I just call like automation of routine tasks. So we've seen a lot of things pop up. If you just search Epic Showroom, for example, you see 120 plus AI related applications. And these are great. Like you can really get a lot of benefit and value from plugging in and doing these things, but they are kind of a one-off like task, right? There's no, what they say like general AI solution set. That's a long way off. Like, but if you really focus on one task, like diagnosing, tumors from some imaging that you take in a hospital, right? Like there's a ton of data that you can use to train those models and teach it again and again and again. Okay, that's cancer, that's not. How do you like train a machine basically to recognize those different patterns and predict the answer that you're looking for? The Gen AI sort of shift is already occurring. There's a ton of manual and painstaking hours spent recording clinical notes and medical notation when patients visit a healthcare provider. Well, we can use some help there. We can have things that summarize cases and tell a doctor very quickly, like here's basically what's happening with this patient. They have a broken left leg and they went through treatment and something else happened.
Hey, Dan, I have a question for David. David, I know we're doing the LinkedIn Live, but is it possible to do the breakouts? How does that work?
Oh yeah, we can jump into breakouts whenever you're ready. Maybe discuss this and then come back and talk more about AI.
Yeah, I think it